Good morning, everyone, on this December morning. Dear speakers, dear government representatives, dear members of parliament and audience, heartily welcome to this seminar, where we invite you to a discussion and a conversation about inequality, a topic that is increasingly important in a world of increasing inequality. I am very happy that we have a long list of excellent speakers and guests today, and I look forward to hear all the speakers. We will also launch a new report today. It's called Quality Tax Aid, a review of the Nordic countries' support for domestic resource mobilization through multilateral institutions. And the report will shortly be presented by Hama Brynholt from Oxfam Denmark and Nordic Alliance for Tax Justice. All the Nordic governments are committed to reducing inequality in many different ways, but also through aid and also by signing the Addis Tax Initiative. We will in this seminar ask questions about the most efficient way to spend this funding available. How can the Nordics achieve maximum impact of their investments in tax aid? A considerable amount of this funding is channeled through multilateral institutions. Are we using these channels and methods that give maximum effect? Is the funding transparent enough? Do we focus enough on quality? And can the Nordics achieve more if they work more and better together? I think we all know that the answer to the last one is yes, but we'll get into that discussion very soon. The audience is welcome to comment and ask questions on YouTube, sorry. Yes, and also let me just say thank you. And I'm so happy to see all these people gathered here today from Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland. We also have with us colleagues from the Tax Justice Alliance in Africa, and maybe we have audience from other countries and continents, we don't know. But welcome to all of you. And the first speaker will be Hama Brynholt from Oxfam. She will present the new report. So welcome to you, Hama.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And thank you for this warm welcome, and good morning to everybody else. And I am so happy to be able to be here, although it is online. I don't know if it's just me, I hear a bad echo, so I can hear myself. Is this only a problem at this end?
We cannot hear the echo, but we are working on to reduce it, because I know it's terrible to speak when you hear yourself in echo, but Christopher is on it. Thank you.
Right. Anyway, so I have the honor and the pleasure of presenting the report. As Lisa said, I'm with Oxfam in Denmark, but today I'm presenting on behalf of the entire Nordic Alliance for Tax Justice, and that's, and just see if I can also just share my, I have a PowerPoint presentation that I wanted to share with you, and I'll just see if I can share my screen. Let's see how we do. Yeah. I hope everyone can see it there. Yeah. So, right, yeah, so I'm presenting today on behalf of the Nordic Tax Justice Alliance, and that is Tax Justice Norway, Fingo from Finland, Diakonia Sweden, Myndighetssamvirke in Denmark, Norwegian Church Aid, Norway, of course, Oxfam from Denmark, and Oxfam in Sweden as well. So, as Lisa alluded to, we had a few questions we wanted to look at when we were talking about DRM, which is domestic resource mobilization. So what were we curious to know? I think we can all agree that at the moment, with the mobilization of sufficient progressive domestic tax revenues, has never been more important, what with the climate crisis, COVID-19 pandemic. And this, of course, is even more so, or even more true for developing countries that have been struggling with many of these challenges for, well, way before the COVID-19 pandemic. And domestic resource mobilization is, of course, also central to the Sustainable Development Goals under 17.1 for the nerdy ones. But with the most recent scandal on the Fedora Papers, it's also clear that it's not only about the amount or the lack of money, but it's also a question of redistribution and the fairness of it, because there is actually money there, but it does seem to disappear into the wrong places. So the Nordics, Denmark, Finland, Norway, Sweden, have a history of being very engaged donors, both on the ODA front, but also on the whole tax, on domestic resource mobilization. They're also all important players. And all 4 countries have been part of the Addis Tax Initiative, which was launched back in 2015. Now, and also all are part of the new ATI declaration. ATI, I should say, Addis Tax Initiative. So the ATI declaration of 2025. And with that, they've committed to increase the official development assistance, enhance domestic resource mobilization on the basis of equitable tax policies, and also apply coherent and coordinated policies that foster domestic resource mobilization and combat tax-related illicit financial flows. So this, as you will know, is the 3rd report in a row that we've done together in this little Nordic alliance. And the first ones were focusing on the collaboration between the Nordics, but also the quantity of ODA that went to DRM. And this 3rd report focuses a lot more on equity, which is also what we picked out in the ATI partnership commitments, which you see on the left side of the screen, but very much that the equity is very central to what we were really curious to know about. So what have we found in this report? Well, one thing, of course, is that more and more funding goes via multilateral organizations, which you can see on this chart here. You can see the share has gone up quite a lot. The Nordic countries is the grey chart, the grey.
Hannah, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we can still only see your first slide.
Oh.
And also we can see the whole setup of your. So you're not in a presenter mode.
I'm not in a presenting mode.
And we can only see your first slide.
And
yeah.
Did this change anything? No.
No.
No, but if you just if you click down on your slides, we will just have to keep it like it is now.
Okay.
But yeah. Now we can see number 3.
Now you can see number 3. All right.
Yeah.
So we will do that, and then okay. So on this slide, maybe I move this out to one side as well. On this slide, this is where you can see the curve of how funding that goes via multilateral organizations has increased quite dramatically. For the Nordics, that's the gray curve. You can see that has really gone up. And if we're looking at you can see we've broken them down into the 4 Nordic countries on the right side there. And here you can see that this is very much true for the Nordics as well. If you're looking at Sweden and Finland, more than half of the ODA goes by multilateral organizations. For Norway, it is about 70%. And for Denmark, it's actually 94%. And this is a number in 2019. 94% of the Danish ODA that went to DRM went through multilateral organizations. I should say that this figure does fluctuate because it depends on the modalities and when there's replenishment and things like that, but it's just to show that there is a huge amount that does go through the multilateral organizations, and this is a change we've seen over the last years. And let's see if we can get to the next one. Right. So, and then we looked at which were the favorite multilateral organizations, and the World Bank and the IMF come out as clear favorites. You can see for Denmark, that's definitely that way. Finland too, there's a bit more balance between Norway and Sweden, but they do come out as the ones that receive most of the ODA. And also, I think I'd just like to underline how important the Nordics are in contributors to domestic resource mobilization. Here you can see these four small countries are the little gray bar, and then the rest of the green one then shows how much it is for the OECD countries. But this just shows that even if they're four small countries, they actually play quite an important role within DRM. And what do multilaterals offer? So there are both some challenges, of course, and then there are also some opportunities. So on the opportunities first, I mean, there's what we hear from the people that we've talked to when doing this report is that it can improve coordination. It's a way of avoiding fragmentation. It can lead to higher benefits from higher operational capacity. And then, of course, it's an opportunity to punch above their weight, which is sort of, I think, what we're seeing here, that here we have four small countries, but they do play quite a significant role. Some of the challenges can be assessing the impact of funding, can be policy incoherence with many different interests and agendas, not only so much amongst the Nordics, but also when collaborating with the rest of the world through maybe the World Bank or the IMF. There can be harmful competition between funds, one size does not fit all. And then also it can be difficult to ensure country-owned reforms and South-South cooperation. So it's clear that the Nordics are committed, and they're also experienced donors within this area. So do they punch above their weight? Was one of the things that we were curious to know. And this has actually turned out to be a little bit difficult to assess whether the Nordic aid really does lead to more progressive tax policies and practices, which they've all four set out to do, including through the ATI. There are some good examples. So on fairness considerations in practice, Norway has some examples of using output stories. On policy coherence for sustainable development, basically looking at the interrelation between different policies, Norway and Finland do have a slightly broader political perspective. When we're talking policy coherence, one of the things that is important to keep in mind is the coherence not only between policies internally in a country, but also thinking about the coherence between national policies and international ones. This could be bilateral tax treaties, it can be international tax agreements, etc. On gender, all set out to focus on gender, and one of the ways is through focusing on progressive taxation, so making sure that the poorest, which are often women, are not taxed proportionally more. On accountability stakeholders, we looked at there's the ATI report from monitoring report from 2018, so from the ATI Secretariat. There we can see that only a very small amount of money goes to country actors, about 6.7%, and local NGOs is 1.7%. And we did in the report from last year, we found that for the Nordics it fluctuates between 13 and 24%. But just to show that there's still quite a lot of room here for improvement on focusing on these accountability stakeholders, which you remember are part of the ATI commitments.
Hannah, sorry to interrupt again. Yes, I think you're getting at the end, so I can see that now. Thank you.
So finally, what did we find at the end was basically what should the Nordic countries do? So Nordic countries should, of course, increase support for developing countries in the field of progressive taxation. They should also make sure that the assistance goes to a wide range of actors, which is what we saw on the past slide, including CSOs and other accountability stakeholders. They should continue to promote gender equality and reduce inequality. Should continue to push for coherence for sustainable development, both through the work in the multilateral institutions in accordance with the ATI declaration, making assessments of the broader impact of these organizations too, so making sure that international tax agreements don't have negative spillover effects on developing countries. The Nordic countries should also recognize their role and the potential in international settings, and also that means making elements that are crucial to development countries an explicit part of the advocacy efforts of the Nordic countries, so very much in solidarity and also living up to their commitments around policy coherence. And finally, we found that there's a good reason to strengthen exchange of experiences and best practices, because there are actually good practices within the different countries that we think could be shared amongst ourselves. And with that, I'd like to turn over to our Nordic representatives. Back to you, Lisa. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannah. Thanks for this introduction. A very enlightening introduction to a rather technical topic. And the report is now available on the websites of the organizers of this event. And I hope that you will have a closer look at it. Thank you so much, Hannah. And now I will give the word to Bjørg Sandskjær, the State Secretary from the Norwegian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. I think, Bjørg, you had some difficulties with your computer, but I think you're with us, hopefully.
I did, Lisa, but I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, we can hear you and see you.
Excellent.
Thank you. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. And I was a bit desperate. I lost sound for a minute because I really wanted to hear the presentation of the report, but I was able to do that. So I'd like to start by thanking you for organizing this seminar, not least thanking the Nordic Alliance for Tax Justice for organizing this event and for the presentation of a very interesting and important report. Obviously, fighting inequality is one of the main priorities of the international development policy of the current Norwegian government, which took office, we're coming up to 2 months ago in mid-October. And we have signaled some changes in the overall priorities, but I would like to also say that Norway will remain consistent and recognizable, and the main programs will continue, including in this important area. We do remain committed to international collaboration to strengthen domestic resource mobilization in developing countries and fight illicit financial flows. It's very clear as well in our new governmental platform. If anything, I think Norway's commitment in this area has increased. So that's why I think also this event is really timely. And I look forward to hearing from my Nordic colleagues as well in the course of our meeting. But to talk a little bit about what we do in Norway first, the Norwegian Tax for Development program is one of the main delivery channels for the commitment to domestic resource mobilization, as many of you here are familiar with. And funding under this program has more than doubled since 2015. We believe it's well aligned with the recommendation of the Quality Tax Report. So we're happy to discuss that with you as well, as I'm sure we will, if not today, then later. The program Tax for Development is coordinated with our work on anti-corruption, illicit financial flows, public financial management, political economy, and statistics. So as you know, this is we need to bring in many different areas to be able to fight illicit financial flows. And the Tax for Development program itself, therefore, it reflects a broad perspective. And the goal of the program is both to increase revenues and to strengthen the social contract in partner countries, which means accountability and transparency are key elements to build trust and reduce inequality. And Tax for Development is engaged in capacity development, both through the Norwegian tax authorities, bringing in the Norwegian institutions, and through partnerships with multilateral and regional institutions like we're discussing today, like the IMF, the African Tax Administration Forum, ATAF, and the Inter-American Center of Tax Administrations. And we believe that this wide approach, where we work through many different channels, is a good way of addressing the complex challenges in countries that request assistance. So this Tax for Development has a clear country focus, but it recognizes that national impact sometimes also requires international changes. So a guiding principle for our overall efforts to strengthen accountability and transparency among stakeholders. Globally, this entails supporting representation of underrepresented countries and stakeholders in international tax-related negotiations and discussions. Nationally, this entails strengthening government, civil society, and the media to perform their roles to promote transparency and accountability. So let me then just say a few words on our work to influence the multilateral institutions, which I know is high on the agenda in our discussion today. So Norway aims to be both strategic and proactive in our approach to influencing domestic resource mobilization policies and practices in the multilateral development banks. Through the boardrooms of these banks, Norway, together with our Nordic colleagues, I think we can say that we have achieved quite a lot, including increasing, or at least to contribute to increasing the multilateral bank's emphasis on equality and progressivity. Obviously, we share, often we share board seats with the other Nordic countries. And so that collaboration, that Nordic collaboration is really important. And I think there was one of the slides as well that showed that we are punching above our weight in terms of impacting programs and policy issues. So I could say a lot more about those results of our joint work in the World Bank to raise the ambitions on these issues with enhanced fairness and progressivity in tax systems, as well as preventing tax avoidance by multinationals as key priorities. For example, in June this year, the World Bank presented its strategic vision for domestic resource mobilization to the board, signaling a clear shift towards stronger commitments on equality and progressivity in tax systems and combating tax avoidance. The bank's approach to domestic resource mobilization is now summed up as, and I quote, promoting fairness, equity, and inclusive growth to build trust. In other strategic documents, including some of the country partnership frameworks, we are also seeing the operationalization of the shift. Again, I think we can say echoing Nordic-Baltic positions. We also work, of course, through the regional development banks. But I know that time is running out, so I'll just stop there. And if there's interest, I'm happy to get back to talking about the regional approach as well as the global. So, but for now, thank you, and I look forward to listening to the other speakers and to our debate. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Björg. Really exciting to listen to you and hear your both the status and your ambitions after 2 months in office. I will now give the word to the Undersecretary of State, Elina Kalku, from the Finnish Ministry of Foreign Affairs.
Thank you, Lisa. And I believe today we're discussing one of the themes where the Nordics can make a true difference. Indeed, and I think the role that the civil society can play in this is highlighted again in this seminar and in the report. And thank you for an excellent report on tax aid. I was asked to share some thoughts on Finland's national strategy and also on the report's findings, and I try to be very brief. First of all, I think the Nordic countries are unusually well placed to promote tax aid work, as they share such a long history of building a welfare society founded on shared values and a strong social contract between governments and citizens. And there may be domestic arguments, and there often are, about budgeting nationally. But I believe there is a very broad understanding and a very solid understanding on the foundations, and individuals and companies can trust that the government not only taxes them, but also delivers value for the revenues collected. And a tax system that is deemed fair and legitimate is an essential element for the functioning of our societies and also those in Global South. Taxation, we know, can be used to fund many public services, but also to promote gender equality or support environmental or climate policies. And therefore, I think Nordic countries are natural supporters of DRM and effective tax systems. And I think we all are constantly approached for advice. Just a few words about Finland's Taxation for Development Action Program 2023, which is about both advocacy and funding of concrete projects. And I will come back to the funding goal a little later. I think the fundamental starting point in the program is that countries can only develop if they have a capacity to collect taxes. And development aid obviously can pass sometimes a very long and turbulent way to the better, or it can fill in gaps, but it is never the end goal. And definitely the goal must always be that developing countries can eventually cover their budget and national costs by their own and do well in the end. Economic growth, we know, provides a vital and necessary basis for development, but we also know that economic growth does not automatically reduce extreme poverty or poverty for that matter. So tax and revenue collection provide funding for important public services, education, health, infra, legal institutions, social protection, and other public services. And they in turn support economic growth and social systems that protect human rights. And we know the way public funds are used and policies defined. It is decisive in eradicating poverty, in reducing inequalities and providing equal opportunities for all. A special focus in our strategies on strengthening Africa's domestic taxation capacities and Africa's voice in global tax policy also. And the program has three main pillars. One is strengthening the taxation capacity of developing countries. Second, ensuring the tax responsibility and transparency of companies, which are supported by development cooperation funding. And three, strengthening the position of developing countries in global tax policy. And in low-income countries, we know tax administrations are facing a wide range of challenges, poorly functioning information systems, inefficiency in tax enforcement and corruption. And these and the reliability of tax administrations are definitely at the heart of our program. Some observations on the report and its 9 recommendations very briefly. I am very glad to say that we find all recommendations very wise and very relevant. By signing the Addis Tax Initiative, the Nordic governments committed to reducing inequality through the aid they provide. And the ATI is truly the backbone of our work. And we're very grateful for the leadership that Norway in particular has shown here. And as you could see from Hana's PowerPoints, Finland still has some way to go to reach the quantitative goal of doubling aid to DRM. And what actually happened at the 2016 budget cuts was that we went the wrong direction downwards with DRM. But we're going to catch up and strive to attain the goal as soon as possible. And I think much work has been invested in this part too. It was already mentioned here that a significant amount of Nordic aid go through multilateral institutions, IMF and the World Bank and others. And I think it is therefore very important to assess whether the aims of the ATI and particularly the goals related to progressivity and inequality are embedded in their work. And Finland, of course, we commit to take a proactive role in advocating the main policies through our memberships in governing bodies of these multilateral institutions, including, of course, the Nordic Baltic constituency at the World Bank. And I think one element is pointed out, a very important element in the conclusions. National strategies often lack clear links between international and national tax policies and the capacity of developing countries to collect taxes. And I believe we all need to play an active advocacy role in international tax policy setting in support of DRM. But overall, thank you very much for the report. The recommendations capture well what needs to be done in the future. So thank you very much for that. And thank you for organizing this event around a very important theme. And I look forward to a fruitful debate today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kalko, and very interesting reflections. And also, for those of you who have read the report, you know that there are quite different approaches to this, how to channel this funding, also between Norway and Finland, who we have heard so far. So it's a really interesting interesting discussion to be had. I think I will now give the word to Mons Fellesson, who is the Deputy Director of from the Swedish Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and he will share with us from Sweden the Swedish perspectives on this. So welcome to you, Mons.
Thank you very much, Lisa, and good morning, everyone. And many thanks for organizing this seminar on DRM and the multilateral support for from a Nordic donor perspective. It's very relevant and very timely, I will say. So many thanks for the report also. It has several merits, and I will come back to this soon. First of all, I would like to apologize for the State Secretary that she couldn't make it, because we have now, this has nothing to do with the importance of the topic. It is because of rearrangement in the Swedish government. We just have appointed a new State Secretary for International Development Cooperation. So she has just stepped into office, and because of other priorities, she couldn't make it. Given the short time, I will go directly to the report and reflect on its content and recommendation from a Swedish perspective. So I will share a few thoughts here, and then I will also go into the Swedish portfolio a bit also. Firstly, as said, this topic is highly relevant. In the wake of the pandemic, the issue of tax has climbed high on the international agenda. We know that looking at the issue of sustainable financing, building functioning systems for DRM is very much seen as a way forward. Loans and aid can provide strategic injections, but are not sustainable financing as the way as DRM, as functional DRM is. We are lagging behind in the fulfillment of the SDGs. More resources need to be directed towards the SDGs, and here tax revenues can make an important contribution. And secondly, an important merit of this report is its comparative approach, putting spotlight on the Nordic countries. What becomes evident when reading this report is that the countries share many similarities running from histories of developing the DRM systems, like a political idea behind it, the belief in tax systems as a social platform and also this institutional setup around DRM. We also have a common is that the societal belief and trust in DRM in the Nordic countries. And this is very important, and I would like to emphasize this because this is the main challenge when building systems for DRM in many countries. Without people's trust, you will not build a strong DRM system. And this is why you need to have a holistic approach to DRM, which includes also issues of democracy, human rights, gender equality, justice, education, etc. We can also see that DRM is firmly embedded in the development strategies of all Nordic countries. We heard from the colleagues now also, and also as well as the principle of policy coherence. All Nordic countries are strong defenders of multilateral cooperation as a way of promoting global development. Linked to the tax issue is this is reflected through the joint signing of the Addis Agenda, the ATI Declaration, the EU Consensus on Development, and not least the substantial funding to various DRM actors under the multilateral umbrella, so to say. And this is well outlined in the report, I will say. With some variety, there seems to be a fairly good consensus also on the selection of organizations subject to support, as we can see. And thirdly, results monitoring and evaluation of the DRM supports to multilateral organizations is a tricky business, we know that. And an important merit of this report is to show that diversity of approaches among the Nordic countries. MOPAN assessments are central, as we can see, and this Sweden supports strongly, but there are also other sources that need to be weighted in. For example, results from the bilateral support. This is an area for closer collaboration between the Nordic countries. So in sum, an important merit of this report is that it discloses the broad spectrum of areas for closer cooperation between the Nordic countries in the multilateral support to DRM. The recommendations are well aligned with the Swedish priorities and ambitions in the area. Given the findings of the report, the last recommendation on the need to strengthen the Nordic cooperation is particularly interesting. There are many reasons for closer cooperation between our countries. If jointly framed and phrased, the Nordic countries can have a much stronger voice in the forming of programs and tools to facilitate the development of functioning DRM system through multilateral organization. And lastly, to put some spotlight on the Swedish perspective, to support a closer cooperation, we are now developing what we call position papers on a position paper on DRM, which basically summarizes the Swedish approach to DRM in relation to the Addis Agenda and the ATI Declaration. And this includes an analysis of the context, its importance for sustainable development, challenges, and it outlines the Swedish main policy positions and contributions. So it's a kind of a package where you find the Swedish approach to DRM in sum, so to say. And we believe that this could be a good platform for closer collaboration with the Nordic countries as well. And I'm happy to share this document as soon as it's translated into English. And finally, I would like to also say that Sweden remains a strong supporter to the DRM as a way of developing society in a sustainable and equal way. And we do this through a quite broad portfolio, running from support through the multilateral channels, through the different development banks, through the OECD, the IMF, but also through the bilateral support, where we have quite a broad range of corporations with different countries in Africa for the most. So once again, thanks you for a very interesting report, which I hope can spur a continued dialogue between the Nordic countries. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Måns. I know we are a little bit behind schedule, which sometimes happens when we have these digital meetings, unfortunately, but I will allow Björg and Måns just 1 minute each to comment on what you've heard from your Nordic colleagues and the representatives from the ministries so far. Just 1 minute each, is that okay? Thank you. So Björg, you're welcome.
Thank you, and thanks to my Nordic colleagues for very good interventions. It's my first discussion in this kind of context, so it's really good to listen to the inputs and to listen to how much we have in common. I was also reflecting a bit along the lines of, I think both Måns and Elina mentioned how much we have in common as Nordic countries in how we have, a domestic experience of the importance of domestic resource mobilization and the importance of trust to be able to make these systems work, and how well we can actually work together to promote this within the World Bank, as well as and we work together as well in the African Development Bank, for example. So just a very sort of brief reflection on the importance of that strong Nordic collaboration to enable us to really push for our joint agenda in collaboration with partners. I mean, this is not something we do alone. I think we also mentioned the importance of working with civil society, and not least the importance of being very well aligned with the countries that we are supporting in increasing the domestic resource mobilization. So that whole sort of partnership way of thinking as being very important. But let me just stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Måns.
Yeah, I just want to echo what Björg is saying, that I mean, and as I said in my intervention, the merit of this report is actually that it shows that we have so many things in common, both when it comes to sort of the approach, the way of looking at DRM as a way of promoting sustainable development, but also the setup and the history, and also the portfolio that we are dealing with within the development corporations. So I think there is a strong argument for for the Nordic countries to join table, and a closer table on this, to see how we can sort of align our contributions, and also see if we can sort of make to do more concentration, to concentrate our support into different areas that we find important. And also, I mean, given and doing that from out the result of our contributions, to see this implies also that we compare the tools, the methods, and so on of how to support, because I think there are much to learn also, even though we are on the same line in this. We can learn much from each other when it comes to more details in the support. So I think this is a strong argument for actually continuing the dialogue, and on a more technical level as well, I will say.
Thank you, Mons. We also have a representative with us from Denmark. He came in a little bit late, and I know that he also has a difficult internet connection. But Peter Ellehøy, are you with us, and are you ready to come in at this point? Peter, he's a special advisor on anti-corruption at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Denmark. It would be excellent to hear from Denmark as well.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you indeed. I have been very happy that my connection has not broken down. I'm sorry about that. But thank you indeed for inviting and for arranging this very, very relevant meeting. I will try to be very brief, because in fact, the beautiful thing is my Nordic colleagues have said many of the relevant things. So let me just focus on two aspects. One is, what is the special Danish approach, or what is the framing of the Danish approach, and what issues to look at, and how to go ahead with the report. So first, I want to highlight that we have a new development strategy, the world we share, that was approved by Parliament earlier this year. The important thing is this is a broad shared strategy, and so it's across political parties. Central in that is that inequality has a prominent role. Fairer taxation systems are highlighted. The focus on facilitating social redistribution, seeing the tax system and the DRM as a vehicle for improving health systems, education for the poor and vulnerable. So overall it's a governance question, and I think the report gives good elements for how to move ahead. And for us, it's very timely because we are in the process of seeing how we can operationalize this Danish strategy. So that's the work being done now. We are going to present that to Parliament in more details in the beginning of the next year. But let me highlight a couple of well, also acknowledge that there are in that added earmarked specific things to DRM, to taxation in the finance bill for the coming year. But what I would like to emphasize here is the points that Björn, Mons and Elina took up on the question about the policy coherence. This is very important also for in the Danish implementation. And I really liked what Mons was stressing about the issue about having clear results-based management. That's one of the things that we actually do as an added value. You could say we bring to the discussion in the international forum an emphasis that we need to be very clear about what comes out of these interventions. So the report asks about what's the added value, or why use the multilaterals? There's a lot of reasons for that. But one of the things we bring to the table there is keeping them accountable to the importance of providing results. And I would add in that connection that this brings, as Björk said, the focus on inequality and progressivity. But I think one thing that is where we as Nordics really bring is the question about bringing gender to the table, to ensure that taxation is not just a technical thing, it's a question about how inclusiveness and so forth. Climate is another one. So putting extra focus on these areas and seeing DRM and taxation not just as a technical issue, but it's a deep down governance issue. It's a question about equality and equal distribution. So I think another one aspect I would highlight is the issue about the Nordic coordination. Indeed, the World Bank boards and so forth are a powerful vehicle. We do punch. I had been myself on the board in the World Bank as a Danish representative, and I can tell we make a difference there. And it has been actually a priority of the Nordic Baltic Group to focus on domestic resource mobilization, and we've made a difference there, I would say. So, but one important thing here, and Mons mentioned it briefly, the issue about learning. The Nordic here, and through what you have brought here with this report, we are still in a learning phase. It's a technical issue to some degree. It's a complicated. It goes into all the different aspects of how a society functions. And we should be very careful about having too simple approaches. So I think what we can here, and what this report also contributes to, it's to showing the different nuances, and we are learning from each other and from the institutions. So there's very much this aspect of working at the broader normative level with the international institutions, and the bilateral work that is also being done, and matching those two. So these were the things I would highlight, and I'm looking forward to the further discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Peter. I'm glad you could join us from Denmark. And I will. We have now heard really interesting, I think, perspectives and reflections from Norway and Finland, Sweden and Denmark. We will now move to a speaker who I believe is in Nairobi, Kenya, at the moment. And he's Mr. Alvin Mosioma. He's the founding executive director of Tax Justice Network Africa. He will give now a brief response from his civil society perspective. Thank you. Alvin, I hope you are ready. The word is yours.
Hello, Lisa.
Hello,
thank you very
morning.
much. Good morning. I'm sorry, there might be some background noise. I had a very unstable internet in the house, so I had to try and move out to find a more stable space. And for that, you might be hearing some background noise, and my apologies for that. First, really thank you for the invitation to offer my perspective, or our perspective, on behalf of the Tax Justice Network Africa to this, what I think really a very important framing report. One thing I think really what for me jumps out really when we talk of coherence, to have Nordic countries come together in terms of trying to see how they're able to create coherence within that region, I think by itself is a remarkable effort. And I think from a civil society perspective, we are seeing a much better coordinated support that is coming from the Nordic countries. And I think that this report really goes to speak to that. But there are a few things that I would like to speak to. Just a second, please.
Okay.
Sorry, the standard interruptions. My apologies. So I think that there are three things that I really want to highlight, which I think are important, building upon what the previous speaker have said. One, I think, is really the complementarity between support towards multilateral institutions and bilateral support that goes through bilateral agencies and directly to in-country support. I think this is really very important, so that while we recognize that there is a lot of value that comes from the coordination and coherence that multilateral institutions provide, it's important to ensure that when you contextualize to national level experiences, there is a lot of added value that support towards striking the balance between bilateral and multilateral support that I think needs to be brought into the conversation. And I'm happy that there's parts of this report that speaks to that issue. The second, I think, is really the importance to underscore that the support towards the domestic resource mobilization through either capacity building is not devoid of politics. I think taxation, as it were, is a political agenda, and the decisions on whose money, on whose pocket you are taking the money are political questions. And I think it's also important to underscore that even at the multilateral level, there are political intentions behind the kind of support that is being provided. And we are seeing this, for example, when you have the world conversation around the convergence on the global tax reforms and the different positions that different regions have taken. I think the contextualization of the political dimensions on the political aspects of the support towards domestic resource mobilization is really critical. Inequality is not an accident. It's as a result of political choices that countries make, is a result of political choices that institutions make. We have seen in many regions in the continent, for example, where there have been efforts towards the so-called easy to collect taxes, the value added tax, the consumption taxes that tend to harm the poor most. So I think providing the political lens towards having a political lens towards the kind of support towards domestic resource mobilization is critical, because again, when we speak of the 4 R's of taxation, we are not only focused on revenue mobilization, but we want to ensure that the mechanism through which that revenue is generated is equitable, that is creating the social contract between the citizens and their government. That's the second point I would like to highlight. The third point is really particularly when it comes to capacity development. I know, for example, there has been a lot of initiatives around, I see I've got 30 seconds left. I'll speak only to this particular point, the effort to really look across the value chain. When it comes to domestic resource mobilization, of course, tax administration plays a very important role, but there are other bodies such as parliaments, the judiciary, that are all very, very important. So as part of complementing the effort towards domestic resource mobilization, to have an angle that looks across the different value chain. Because of time constraints, I'll stop there for now and really once again compliment this report and hope that it forms a foundation for further conversation. Thank you very much, Lisa, for the opportunity.
Thank you, Alvin. I'm happy you could be with us today. We actually do have some people who need to leave very soon, and I will therefore jump a little bit down on the speaking list to Christian Juhl from the Danish Parliament. Christian, I know you have to leave in a couple of minutes, unfortunately, so if you would like to go ahead now and give your perspectives, we would be happy to hear those. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a dilemma, because it's the Nordic country, the Nordic Council who meets today. I'll say thank you very much for the report. It's so important, especially for me, because we have been working with this, because Denmark is in these questions a small sister, and we are trying to be a little bit better. In the negotiation about the budget for 2022, 25 minutes before we finished the negotiations, we got extra 5 million Danish kroner for the tax initiative, and that shows how small role it plays in a lot of our discussions in Denmark, and I hope it could be better in the future. I think that these questions is important not only for countries with very small economy, but also for other countries, because we have these years with the transnational companies who is going to tax havens, and they are weakening all countries' economy. That's why we have to work closely together. Of course, it's important to fight gender equality and fight inequality, and that's why we have to make extra initiatives like this. But the countries also have interest in working with these things. Tax avoidance, lack of progressive tax systems, transparency, tax haven is not only things in third world. Don't forget that EU just made a new list of tax haven countries in EU, and they took away 2 or 3 of the countries in this list last time they renewed it, although they still are tax havens. So we are weakening the fight inside EU, and we have to strengthen it both there and in our cooperation in third world. So I think the report is really well placed in these years, and it's really well placed that its Nordic countries is working closer together. So I think we have to show stronger initiatives of all countries, although we normally will say, oh, we are so good and we are so good, but we have to make it much better, and we have also to make inspiration to other countries in the rich area of the world. So I say thank you very much for the report. It will be a big inspiration, and I think the Danish Minister of Development Aid will be called to a meeting in the Parliament inside 1 month, because we have to discuss this further on and be better in Denmark. And I also want to say that I will take these questions on the agenda in my work in Nordic Council, because it's important that we discuss it also there. Thank you very much for good inspiration and good ideas.
Thank you so much, Christian. Thank you for being able to be with us. And I'm sorry that you have to leave, but I'm happy that you're going straight into a Nordic meeting. So good luck on that.
And I can see that I can find the discussions afterwards. That's really happy.
That's great to hear. Thank you so much.
Thank you
To Christian. I will then give the word to Toril Irene Pedersen from NORAD. She is the Assistant Director and Head of Section for Governance and Transparency. Toril Irene, varsågod.
Thank you very much. And I would just like to say that it's very inspiring for us to hear all the speakers before me, the diversity of perspectives, yet there's also a common thread of commitment, which is very, very nice for us to hear from NORAD's side. And since our State Secretary spoke very eloquently about the Tax for Development program and that approach, and maybe I'd like to take the liberty to kind of to go a little bit deeper into the issue of tax and inequality, just to steer and be a little bit honest about the challenges that we're facing in order to kind of get there to the goal that we all see that we're aligned behind here. Just to start off also, I think what we're doing here is a model of what kind of engagement that we would like to facilitate also in the developing countries that we're supporting through Tax for Development and through a lot of the other programs. Where civil society and governments and also researchers have been involved and has the capacity to debate and discuss options publicly. So what we're doing is not only that we're tackling this, but we're also modeling a kind of ecosystem for tax reform and tax accountability stakeholders in developing countries. And the previous year's discussion was discussed in many of the ATI forums after as a very successful model, and that is inspiring to our countries and partners. So I think we should be humble from the tax side. We should be humble and say that the tax policy and tax reform and tax aid is not alone going to tackle inequalities. But we also know that if you are going to have a government that instills trust and that fosters a social contract, there needs to be sufficient funds in the domestic coffers to be able to fund basic services and to respond to the needs and rights of the population. And in many of the countries that we're collaborating with, when even if you take the GDP per capita and distribute it equally amongst all, you would still be below a poverty level. So that in itself shows that there's a bottleneck to reducing inequality, and that is the DRM aspect. And of course, we're committed to making sure that what we're supporting with Norwegian aid funds has the aspects of transparency, accountability, and participation, because we think that's important. But it's also the crude fact that there needs to be money to be able to fund services, to be able to reduce inequality. So it's about how we collect the funds, but it's also about how we're spending the funds. So I would invite us to make sure that at least at the country level, we take a broader lens when we discuss the issue of inequality. And our target is, of course, to make sure that countries should get above the 15% tax to GDP ratio. It's not a silver bullet, but it is a very important target for many countries. Now, I mentioned the ecosystem approach, and this we have to say is a challenge. So what we've in Tax for Development and the approach that we've described in the strategy is, you need to make sure that all of the relevant stakeholders at the country level have the capacity to engage. And yet, even if we support the different stakeholders and the elements there through multilateral, but also through civil society, research, local research capacity, getting it to work together towards some of the policy objectives of the national governments and the civil society is a challenge. So this is something that I think for us to look at, the headline of this event, the quality of tax aid, we need to look at how we use the different partners that we have, make sure that the mix of partners and the mix of the initiatives that we support is the right one for the countries that we're supporting.
Toril, I think we have to conclude now, unfortunately.
That's fine.
Thank you, Toril Irene. We are getting through the long list of excellent speakers. We have a couple left, and I also encourage everyone to ask questions on YouTube, and we will have some time. And you have a lot of really excellent people here you can ask questions, so please write down your questions. The next speaker is, he's from the academic perspective, and that's also a very interesting perspective to have. Matti Ylönen from Tallinn and Helsinki universities. Please, you're next. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here. So I'm from the University of Helsinki and Tallinn University of Technology at the moment in a research leave there. I will try to be brief. First of all, considering that Nordic countries are collectively a very significant player in global development policy. It's really a pleasure to see a report such as this. There's not too many of them coming out, so to kind of facilitate collective discussion. My own comment is going to take a bit more kind of bird's eye view to this matter with the context that I've been following for financing for development policies for some 20 years and also researching early push for tax and development policies in the 1970s at the United Nations. And one thing that I've noted is that new policy agendas in this field, they often start with great difficulties. Different players are kind of hesitant of taking new policy initiatives. Then they kind of start to speed up and reach their apex in a way, scoring some victories. But then that is the crucial point to ask, what comes next when new agenda has been mainstreamed? And I think we are precisely at that point with the tax and development agenda. So we have seen a number of financing for development agendas rise very fast and then fall, like the Jubilee debt agenda, different initiatives related to trade policy and so on and so forth. So the question is how to sustain momentum. And when we think about the tax and development agenda, it started in a bit kind of with some quite revolutionary ideas at the time in the early 2000s, country by country reporting, unitary taxation of multinational enterprises, full transparency of different ownership regimes and so on. And today, many of these have actually become mainstream, even though at the time, for example, the World Bank was really hesitant on tackling this phenomenon of tax and development. So the question is, we need now the next big ideas to carry on this policy agenda, and I think Nordic countries can play a really proactive role in this to kind of support the renewal of these debates. And I think in order to facilitate such renewal, I think it's really key, it's really important to support a large variety of actors in civil society, in research institutes, in different fields of tax and development policy. It's not unlike, for example, innovation funding, where you really need to diversify the funding in order to create some success stories. So not every initiative, not every funding will succeed in full amount, but if you diversify, then you can actually have some victories as well and some initiatives that will bear fruit. And against this background, I found it interesting the difficulty that the authors of this report had in obtaining meaningful information on the funds of the World Bank and the IMF, considering how much funding actually goes into these funds. And there were some optimistic notions that, okay, new evaluations and new assessments are coming out, and I'm really looking into that. But I'm also kind of worrying of this tendency that, of course, for aid actors, it's often easy to kind of channel funding to these funds because they create very little administrative burden in the donor countries because it's just money going to these big development actors. But I think we really need to balance between these kind of big funds and then supporting this diversity of actors in local levels, in international organizations. So yeah, and I'm concluding here. So I think this kind of institutional competition also when it comes to international organizations is a good thing, funding different UN agencies to balance out the OECD's work and so on and so forth. And close Nordic cooperation will be is a key aspect for these kinds of efforts. So I conclude here. Thank you.
Thank you, Matti. I miss being in the room where you can actually, not use the chat to talk to everyone, but to see people. But there we are at the moment, unfortunately. The last, but definitely not the least, the speaker is Magnus Ek. He's from the Swedish Parliament. He's also serving on the Committee of Foreign Affairs. So, Matti, thanks for your... Magnus, thanks for your patience, and now the word is yours. Thank you.
I didn't need any patience at all. It's been super interesting listening to all of you. And I have 3 minutes to kind of sum up my thoughts about what all of you have said, and also to ask questions. I won't be able to do that in 3 minutes. We can just give up on that right now. But I would like to raise some points that I thought were interesting from my perspective as a parliamentarian for the Centre Party and spokesperson on foreign development in the Swedish Parliament. First of all, I'll just say all your recommendations, I think I can get behind all of them. I think they're basically wise recommendations that most of us should and could be able to get behind. And especially when it comes to Nordic cooperation. I mean, it's not just that we have more power together, and if we want to punch above our weight, the first thing we should do is coordinate better. But I also think we really and truly have some things to learn from each other. And when we go out into the world, most people see Scandinavians or Nordic countries more than Sweden, Denmark, Norway, and Finland, and so on. But I would like to stress the importance of combating corruption and tax evasion as a package. This isn't just about sending a signal. This is about building and helping build and strengthen robust systems in the countries and regions where we work that can start to turn the tide of corruption and tax evasion. And I think if there's anything and just one thing we could do to kind of mobilize resources, but also strengthen what we in Sweden would call tax morality. I mean, the willingness from the population to actually pay taxes and contribute. Sorry, they want this meeting room, but they'll just have to wait 2 minutes. It is engaging in trying to build that capacity within the countries. I mean, for example, the work that we do from the Nordic countries in trying to strengthen auditors and auditing agencies in countries that we work with and partner with. I think that's one of the most important things we do. I would like to say that as a classical liberal, I'm kind of a bit stressed over this progressive. When we're talking about tax systems that have to be progressive, if we by that mean that they should be progressive, that you should pay a progressively higher tax. I'm not sure that I want that kind of tax system in Sweden, and I'm quite sure that my colleagues as parliamentarians would like a say on that. What I think that we all could get behind is a progressive tax system in the sense that we gather taxes equitably and that we use them for progressive policy. And I see that from all the Nordic countries that is really what we're striving for. I mean, building, for example, social security systems in countries which we partner with. I think that's also an important thing to build tax morality. I would like to say a word or two about multilateral funding, because I think it's interesting the conclusions that you draw in this report and what you've been looking at. And I'm sure that you're right in that we can punch above our weight when we support UN agencies or UN organizations within the multilateral system that we want to prioritize. But we should also be aware of the problem that there is also risk that our values and our aims are diluted when we go into these big multilateral organizations. And from the Centre Party side, one thing that we would like to do is strengthen the bilateral work that we do in Sweden. And we see that funding has been shifting to multilateral organizations. And with that, I'll just conclude there. And thank you once again for a very interesting discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Magnus. And thank you for being able to join us from the Swedish Parliament. I am getting quite a few questions coming in now. We have an excellent group of people here who probably have answers to these questions, but I will try, unless the question is really targeting one person, I will try to give the word to a few of you, and I just ask for your patience. I don't think we will be able to get through all the questions. Let me start with a question on gender. The Nordics have an important role to advocate for a gender perspective in DRM, resource mobilization. What can be done in practice in this regard in the IMF, the World Bank approaches, and in ATI? Maybe I can challenge government and ministry representatives to answer first, to comment briefly on that. Björg and Måns and Peter, please.
Thank you, and thanks for raising a very important question. And obviously, what we're trying to do with the whole DRM agenda is to fight inequality. And I think our colleague from Kenya made a very important point around, that we need to be aware that how we collect taxes means something, and that we make sure that the way that we set up taxation, or countries, not we, countries set up their taxation systems, to make sure that we don't, for example, tax the poor harder, that we make sure that they're well targeted. And we can, as Nordics, I think, raise that gender perspective as well, because we do know that, for example, there are more women in the informal economy. How do we bring that into our thinking around taxation systems? So I think it's a good question, and there may be others who have more practical experience of how this is done, but certainly this is something that we should be thinking about and be aware of as we work on tax.
Thank you, Björg. Perhaps Peter, would you like to say a little bit about how we could incorporate gender more as well?
Thank you indeed. Absolutely a very relevant question. And let me give an example of it. It's basically, we are evaluating the IMF interventions and the World Bank interventions. Actually, so this report is timely because it comes at a time where we're going through, are they meeting what we want and so forth. And there actually, we Nordics have been quite involved in formulating the terms of this evaluation. And specifically, the question about gender was highlighted as an issue that we wanted to be strengthened. So there is much more focus now than previously on the issue of gender, recognizing, as Björn said, that it has importance for the fair distribution and so forth. It's also an opportunity to highlight what the Tax for Justice, the importance of civil society in this. And that voice and the accountability is really an important thing that we can try. So I just wanted to bring in that example with the evaluation. I think that will be coming in next year, in the middle of next year, and will be highly relevant for all of us. Thanks.
Thank you. Måns, would you like to come in quite rather briefly, yeah. I would say, on gender as well? Thank you.
Just very short about equality and gender equality in particular. I mean, equality is very much the foundation for the Swedish approach to DRM. It's about redistribution of resources in society. And as you know, Sweden has a feministic foreign policy. And within this policy, we have a specific coalition for gender equality. And within this coalition, tax is an issue that is constantly stressed within the different forums that Sweden engaged in. So this is what I can say.
Thank you, Måns. No, thank you. And I know you all have a very solid commitment to gender, so it's going to be really interesting to see how you can work more on that. I think also jointly. We have a lot of questions on the use of the channels. I don't think I can go through all those different questions. They obviously touch upon different challenges and aspects of that. But I will just ask you the more overarching question. Should the Nordic countries continue to channel such a big share of their support through the World Bank and the IMF? So you can answer yes or no to that, but you can also elaborate maybe on why you think we should or why we shouldn't. And I think maybe this time, first I will give the word to Magnus Ek, but I would also love to hear from others. Maybe you can raise your hand if you would like to answer this. Thank you. Magnus, please.
Thank you. I would say yes and no. I think that we have to, I think that it's a good thing that we've been committed to funding, for example, initiatives through the World Bank and other large multilateral organizations. But as I alluded to in my as I alluded to before, I think that we really have to stress the question: Are we funding multilateral organizations just as a matter of fact, and not really thinking hard about what are the alternatives? And I can see that trend in Sweden when we give more and more funding to large multilateral organizations, because we don't really stress the importance of our bilateral work, and that makes it harder for us to work with for example, civil society organizations. And as Matti said during his conclusion, I think that it's good that we have a diversity, that we have institutional, that we have institutions that kind of vie with each other for our support. That's a good thing. And I think that that diversity is something that we should value. So yes and no. I'm not saying cut down on the IMF or those commitments, but really try to build up our bilateral work. And why not in cooperation between the Nordic countries?
Thank you, Magnus. I can see that Hannah has also raised her hand on this. Hannah, please. And then Peter after that.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So just echoing also on the diversification, I think that's a very valid point that Magnus raises there. I think also one of the things that we found in the report is that if we're looking at the multilaterals, it's difficult to see exactly where the money goes. And also some of the multilaterals have a history of being less progressive. I know that the policies have been changing. This is also something we found, the policies have been changing, but there seems to be a gap in what's happening at policy level and what's actually happening on the ground. So that's one thing I think to be conscious about as well, whether that is really the right way of going, but also because we've seen in other fields of work on debt, for example, the World Bank and the IMF are still putting in austerity measures. It's kind of still the old school. So in policies it's right, but in practice there's still some work to be done. So I think this is one of the things to be cautious about, and that's why I think the diversification and making sure that we're not only putting all our eggs in one basket can be a good way of going. And also if we're looking at the way that you mentioned earlier, Toril, that one of the ways of measuring the tax work is the GDP ratio, and that of course is one way, but there should maybe also be other ways. And it's kind of a both, and we're all for multilateral collaboration. It brings a lot of positive things, but there are also some challenges, and we need to be super conscious about that, and maybe think about diversifying and really making sure that we do also support, and now I'm talking not only as CSOs, but generally sort of supporting other stakeholders that work on this. So it can be CSOs, critical journalists, etc. So just supporting the diversification. Thanks.
Thank you, Hannah. Thanks for sharing your perspectives. And then Peter, I will welcome you to comment on this as well.
Yeah, thank you. It will basically be a supplement to what Magnus and Anna has just been saying, because actually, as I was saying before, it's a governance issue. It's a question about, it's a cross-cutting issue in so many ways. I think the important thing, Hannah mentioned this between the policy level and the field level, what happens on ground. And I would just wanted to highlight that the Danish policy there has indeed recognized this aspect. And we have a broad framework called Doing Development Differently, which is basically what's called adaptive management and ensuring that multilateral efforts complement bilateral efforts and vice versa, so that there is this cross-fertilization between what's being done at the multilateral level and the bilateral level. And I can't emphasize enough how important that is. For people who have been working in the field knows that the reality out there is very different from what's being decided in New York or in Washington. And it's the dialogue between these levels that is really important. And from our side, we have put a lot of emphasis on joining the dots between what our great colleagues in the field are doing and what's being done at the policy level in international financial institutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Peter. So now I will give the word to Måns. Måns, you're welcome.
Very short. I'm not in the position to promote the one over the other, but we have been talking about the issue of quality. And I think that's a quite central aspect. And if you look at the quality and you look at in terms of results and monitoring, I think that the best way is to have some kind of a balance between bilateral and multilateral, because I think, and also for the Nordic cooperation, I think that the bilateral cooperation can inform our position also in the multilateral organizations. So I think to strike a balance between that, because as been said, what's happening on the ground and the result of so localized approaches, I think that's very important for our engagement and our positioning in the multilateral discussions.
Thank you, Mons. So we are getting close to the end of the seminar. I'm sorry, but I really would like also to invite Björg from the Norwegian government to have a word at the end as well. And maybe, Björg, I know that I already asked you one question, but could I ask you one tiny other question as well at the end? How can we, as the Nordics, influence the development partners such as IMF and the World Bank to be more committed to the question of equitable tax? Thank you. Björg, you're welcome.
Thank you. And I think that's a great question. I was reflecting on this relationship between the bilateral and the multilateral, which we were discussing, but it links actually to the second question you asked, Lisa. So let me see if I can try to address both. So first on the bilateral versus multilateral, I don't think it's either or. And I think we have, from Nordic colleagues, I think we see that we have a sort of similar approach to this, to say that we have our bilateral efforts. I spent some time describing the Norwegian Tax for Development program, for example. But when we work together in the multilateral institutions, we see that, you know, we really have experience that we can change them. One recent experience from the IDA 20 results framework. I mean, IDA 20 is the biggest development cooperation instrument in the world. So if we can go in as Nordics and change the result, you know, everyone here has experienced development cooperation. So when I say when we can change an indicator, you know how important that is when we change the results reporting on IDA 20, and where we have worked together to include a new indicator to trace increased tax fairness. So that's where we can see that we really punch above our weight again and make you know, changes to huge pots of funding. So again, I think we should be able to do both, and that links in as an example to the second question of how the Nordics can work together, sharing board seats. You know, given that we have a very aligned agenda discussed in the Nordic Council, for example, and the Nordic forums that we have, and make sure that we also have those partnerships with civil society, academia, and others to help inform our positions. So this is probably the last time I get to speak. So let me also take the opportunity to thank you again for this very timely and interesting and useful seminar, and for bringing the different voices to this table. Thanks.
Thank you, Björg. And I think with that, we have to conclude, unfortunately. Thank you so much to everyone who participated on the panel. Lots of really interesting perspectives and insights and commitment, which is very encouraging to see also from our perspective, being the civil society. We are also very committed to partner with you and to challenge you. And we look forward to see how the Nordics can continue to punch above their weight. And we wish you the very best luck on that. And thanks to all the speakers, and please have a look at the questions if you have time as well on Facebook and YouTube, where there still are questions that we didn't have time, unfortunately, to go through. But thank you so much, everyone, for participating today, and have a good festive season. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.